Hey Pascal, how's it going?
Hey Benji, not too bad. What about you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Just a second.
Two
Being
cats today.
pinged somewhere.
One is a bit sick. The other one just joins today because she's probably caring about the other one. I don't know.
Hello.
Had to be. Hi Cheryl.
Hey, how's it going? How are you?
Yeah, not too bad.
All right, excellent.
Thanks for the comments on the open telemetry pull request, by the way.
For me,
Yeah, I believe so, right? The semantic conventions one. I think you had some
was
thoughts.
that me? I don't know. I don't remember. I've looked at so many things lately. So,
You know
well,
what's
you're
funny?
welcome. If that was actually me.
You know what's funny, Benji? I just had a discussion with a customer of ours which said that they had issues and sent me a link, and I clicked on the link and checked the logs, the request, and said, well, you have a execution error, right? So that's how you can fix it. And then he replied, oh damn, but it's a 200. And I was like, well, uh,
Oh
they say
dear.
they say I was misled.
Needs to be a 294.
Oh yeah, looking forward to it.
Ah, there are five people on the list. There are five people in the call. I'm gonna assume that they're the same people and start us off. Hey everyone, welcome to the July meeting of the Golden Path Working Group. By being here, we've all agreed to the specification membership agreement, the participation guidelines, the contribution guide, and the code of conduct. And we're aware that the meetings are recorded, they're published to YouTube, and that we use large language models and AI summary tools with the transcripts. We'll start with a quick introduction of attendees, which will go in the order that they are in the agenda. So go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'll start. I'm Toby. I work on the Cedar.js full stack GraphQL framework, and I'm here to talk about hopefully uh, fragments and fragment co-location.
Critical topics indeed. Hey everyone, I'm Benji from Graphart.
Hi, I'm Pascal from Chili Cream. I think Michael will join late, so we can skip him.
All right, I'm Gerald from Apollo.
Mark from Yelp.
Perfect. Welcome, everyone. So, as always, the AI is taking notes for us, but if you think that it's not going to do a good job, and that does happen quite often, please do contribute to the notes doc that is linked in the agenda. I am just going to quick scan to see if there are actually any action items. I don't think so. No, no action items. And so, as a reminder, we do have grants available for key initiatives. So if you're doing anything that contributes to the GraphQL Foundation's projects and a little bit of financial support would help there, please do apply. Today's agenda only currently has one topic on it, but I would like to also talk about limits and the various forms of limits and what values we should use for them. So if there is time at the end, I would like to talk about that. Is there anything else that people would like to add to the agenda? No, perfect. In which case, I'll pass over to Toby to kick us off with fragment collocation.
Yeah, so I don't know where to start really. I assume you're all familiar with the topic in general. And so I'll just dive straight into the way we approach this in Cedar, or the way we do GraphQL or data fetching in general. Actually, we have this concept of cells, which is a way to write a query and a few React components in the same file. And this gets wrapped in a React higher order component. So you get your query as a follow client use query hook, and you get your error states, your loading states, and the final success state. So that's how we collocate the data fetching or the query with a component that will actually use it. We also have experimental support for fragments, but it's like we don't mention it much in the docs, and the support is not very developer friendly. So typically we use these cells, and they all declare their own root queries. So we will fire off a single query for every single cell that we have. So I was looking at and reading through the Golden Path documentations, and I was thinking about how I can approach this and have an implementation that's more closely aligned with the Golden Path for our users. And I found some frictions and some questions when I was reading the docs, and mainly about how they currently seem very focused on the way that that Relay does it. There is a TBD to document code gen, or tools that read your code and generate the queries for you. But yeah, there's nothing there yet. So yeah, I was just thinking, or I just wanted to know, like, what are the current options, if there are any, that are not Relay that I can look at, and also like how hard should we, or like how prescriptive should we be in the recommendations here? Because one thing that I found is that if you go all the way out on fragment collocation, every single component that needs any kind of data turns out to be more of a GraphQL component, less of a React component, in the way that React says that components should be used, in that they are very closely tied to a specific GraphQL operation, and their data needs to come from GraphQL. Whereas React wants your components to be reusable across your application, and maybe even shared across several applications. But if you have fragments in them, that ties them to GraphQL. So if you have an application that has data coming from other sources, not GraphQL, I think that makes it difficult. So I was kind of hoping that we could loosen the language a little bit and leave it up to the developer, like how far down the leaf nodes they want to have their fragments.
Yeah.
I'll stop there. Yeah.
Really, really happy to have this conversation. Hi, Michael. Welcome. Do you want to just introduce yourself for just a second?
Oh yeah, sorry guys. I'm Michael from Chili Cream.
Perfect. We'll carry on. So we're just talking about the fragment collocation and what I've called in the Golden Path query componentization. So one of the things in the Golden Path, like, keep in mind, the Golden Path is very much work in progress. So yes, any changes to this are very welcome. I wrote up the practice of query componentization as basically the concept of thinking about GraphQL as a way of composing your various data needs together, and building perhaps like a query, an operation out of that. There are many different ways of doing that, and the most common one is fragment collocation. It's relay style, or there are many other clients that do it as well. So, for example, Apollo have data masking, where they read the fragment from the normalized store. So this is actually quite normalized store centric way of doing things. There's the GraphQL code generator approach, which is actually type level. So this takes a fragment and then just builds like effectively a fake TypeScript type around it that says you only have access to these properties, when actually you just have all of the data. Those have different trade-offs. There's also things like GQL-to-dar that have their own form of this fragment masking, fragment collocation. And these are two like patterns that get used together, like the masking and the collocation are generally used together. The collocation is to help you to build up the query from lots of small parts, but also really very much avoid this problem of overfetching, where you build like one big query somewhere and you're requesting a whole bunch of fields that you're never rendering. And this actually is something that we tend to see as like a really, really big issue. When people do that in GraphQL, you end up pulling down like 10 megs of data, and the whole application grinds, like it's really, really slow. So this is what we're trying to avoid. And then you've got the masking, which is basically just a way of enforcing that you are definitely requiring all the data that you're actually relying on, so that it means that you get that local reasoning and you're not impacted by some other component removing a field that it no longer needs, but it turns out your component depends on it. But these are very specific to this particular solution to query componentization. As I put in the docs, there is like the code to query generation, where the application sees when you access a property and kind of builds a fragment or builds the query itself under the hood. There were various approaches to that in the past that were quite experimental. I don't know where those have landed. I don't use any of them myself. And then you've also described how you handle it in CDAR. And that, I mean, that might well be a reasonable solution to this problem, in which case write it up. But you did mention that it had a few like developer ergonomics issues. Would you care to go into those in a bit more detail?
Sure. Well, so I myself haven't used our current fragment implementation much, so I can't speak to that really. So what I do know very well is how we do our cells right now, and as I said, they all produce a single, like each have their own root query. So you get into the typical waterfall problem where one cell first have to fetch the data for that cell, and then it will render another cell who does a whole new fetch for its own data, and that happens all the way down. So what people typically end up doing is having one large cell at the top, and then, as you say, passing all the data around. Eventually, things will get out of sync. And there's also like this tension, both in Cedar, but also with this model, I feel, is between TypeScript types and GraphQL. I feel like this felt more natural when Redwood actually was more of a JavaScript framework, and you didn't have your TypeScript types, because then your GraphQL schema was basically your type guarantee, and tooling around that would help with that. But now that you also specify TypeScript types, things start to feel even more redundant. So I feel like the TypeScript types, they help. Well, they actually solve a bunch of the problems that we are also trying to solve here with fragment or with the query components.
Yeah. So normally the way that you would do this is generate the TypeScript types from the GraphQL request. So like definitely the TypeScript types are vital for this. And you can use the TypeScript types a little bit to help solve this. They still have this, like just those, I mean. They would require, for example, that you've made sure that these properties are available. And this also helps to avoid certain classes of issues. So for example, field merging, you might have a collection that you require, and you might request it with 10 items in one place and 5 items in another, and that would be a conflict. If you do that in TypeScript types, you don't specify the arguments. You just say, I need it to be a list, and you handle the list no matter what it has. So the TypeScript approach does definitely have advantages if you're only doing that. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't ensure that you are then using those capabilities. And it's not, it's more challenging when it comes to the local reasoning, because when you then render your child component, you need to know what your child component needs. And GraphQL is very tree-based. So merging the types that your child needs on a tree basis into your own requirements to tell your parent what you require is quite challenging. Whereas with GraphQL, it's very obvious how to do that, because you just do it with fragments. You just do fragment spreads. So the TypeScript approach, I think, is quite challenging to do on its own. But at the end of the day, the main things that we're trying to fight here are fetching more data than you're actually rendering. We should avoid that. And also making it so that you can make a change locally without impacting any of your like sibling components. That one's less important from a like GraphQL point of view, but I think it's still an important piece of the experience that we want you to have in GraphQL. So if there are other solutions that you can come up with that solve those same problems, I'd love you to write them up as a guide inside the Godon Path.
Yeah, on the note about reusability too, like I think fragments definitely make things a lot more plug and play. I don't see it necessarily as a competition or a tension necessarily with kind of the React model. I think it works really well with it, but it really makes it so that you say, okay, I work on this this piece of data. Here's what I need. If that means any query or mutation or whatever that you need to plug that data in, you just plug it in rather than having to go find all of the trees that include a path to that component, right? So, in that way, it makes it easy to put it wherever you need to.
I mean, that's the mental model behind fragments was that these are the data contracts for the UI components.
Yeah.
So you formulate the data requirements that this component has, and I always like this concept, because then componentization of the UI components means you're building by accident. The query is the accident of putting UI components together, in essence. It's a bit simplified, but
yeah.
Yeah, but then we have this whole fragments are not for reuse message that we try to educate people on. I feel that isn't that also a contradiction here then?
What can you repeat?
Yeah, we say that fragments are not for reuse, right? Yeah, it's not the way to have reuse.
It's not for drying up a set of fields. Like if you look purely at a GraphQL query and you say, oh, I duplicate this field and this field, they're always together, so I'm going to extract that to a fragment. That's the kind of duplication or the reuse that we're trying to avoid, because that doesn't necessarily map to UI components. That's just basically trying to say, I want to extract a set of fields together and, but when you're talking about UI components, like it's not saying you can't reuse that UI component multiple times, like getting away from that. But yeah, it's really meant for that. And typically that means that you're not going to have two UI components that have the exact same set of data needs, right? If they did, then you're probably going to merge those components together. But yeah,
there's a really good video from I think 2024 GraphConf, where Jordan from the Relay team really put these mental models into explains these mental models, and he also explains, like, typically when you reuse these fragments like in multiple components, and now one of the components changes and needs more or less field, then everywhere where you use this other component, it suddenly bleeds extra data in. or you're breaking that other component. So ideally, if you take a UI component out of your UI component tree, then also the data requirement is gone and the query just fetches less data. But there is, I can link it probably later. Benji already did.
I just feel like I
Yeah.
want TypeScript to scream at me if I end up with a mismatch of what a component, what
does.
data a component needs. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. I mean, the Relay compiler does it generates TypeScript types from that, and also screams at you if you do something wrong there.
Yeah, well, but what I mean is that TypeScript is enough for this. We don't need to force every single leaf component to have a GraphQL fragment inside. I want my components to be reusable, even for in context where the data doesn't come from GraphQL.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's still cases for normal components, but I think what you want to try to avoid is components that say, "Hey, I have this generic type user that I manually coded that says I need first name, is logged in, is all these things," and then you're constructing that. All of that data comes from GraphQL somewhere, and you have to like map it yourself manually. Like it's easier to take the fragment and say, "Okay, this is my contract for this component because I know this data comes from the server." But you may have other components like a date component that's responsible for displaying something, or let's say like a full name component that takes a first name, last name.
Yeah.
That's probably easier. It's just props. You probably don't need a full name component to be fragment on user, first name, last name, like that's more generic. So all of that I think still works correctly. But I think what it's trying to move towards is just avoiding this whole like every piece of data in my props comes from my server somewhere. I'm going to manually type that and and avoid fragments for that. Like the fragments are really good for that case.
Maybe.
Yeah, I like that you say that out loud, because when I was reading the Golden Path documentation, it really did seem to me like every component should specify their data needs as a GraphQL fragment. Like so your example of a full name component would, like, when I first read the documentation, it sounded like that had to be a fragment. It couldn't be just regular React props. But if we maybe should make that more explicit, that it's allowed to have normal components as well.
Pascal has its hand up.
Yeah, just before you come in, Pascal, I just want to agree that first sentence in the fragment co-location article is definitely too strong. That's not the intent there. So yeah, I understand what you've been pushing against now.
So, I mean, just conceptually, the idea of fragments, I think there's two things which are interesting here to reason about. Have you ever heard of a JavaScript library called Fate?
Yes.
So Fate essentially introduces fragments without GraphQL. So essentially, you have any data contract that you can use. The views in Fate are essentially fragments. It's from one of the, I believe, Relay guys that did this, but I'm not sure. And the interesting thing, I believe, with the concept of the data contract is that, yes, exactly this one. Yeah, if you you can now just in isolation change a component without any side effect. And while this comes from a production need in Facebook or in Meta, I guess all the other big companies as well, it's still quite useful to do it on your own, I would say, because essentially you only have to change one file, you don't have to change two files. I believe, could be mistaken here, but I believe the main reason why it was introduced is that you essentially can work in modules without affecting the other modules. So you can essentially work in your little domain in big teams in Facebook without having to touch the code of the owner of the page. And I would say, like, I've never seen, if you use componentization, I've never seen a reason to not use fragments. So for me, like, we could also phrase it like this in my personal opinion, we could phrase it like this in the golden path. Like you don't have to do it, but why not? Like it's not like
You should.
I mean,
you should, but you should.
no, yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
the thing
you
is,
should.
I think no, I think it's less strong than persistent documents, because in persistent documents we say you should, which means that you should really feel bad if you don't do it, and you should feel bad if you don't do it. But I don't think in fragments this is the case. I just see so many teams fail because they don't use fragments.
Yeah, the thing I've seen so many times, especially with Apollo users over the years, which we've really tried to change, is people say, I want an isolated component, and to them that means a component that fetches its own data, which means you've got use queries all over the place. And now, my favorite saying is called RESTQL. So you're basically just replicating REST but with GraphQL queries. Now that's what we're trying to avoid. Obviously fragments help with that a lot.
And that's why there's request batching.
So
yeah. Yes. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
We have just as an FYI, like we do this for a while now, and I think we had a handful of customers which understood GraphQL and our framework and the other frameworks all together right the first time. Like I would say most of our customers that we work with got one or the other thing wrong. And I think on what we see, it's a bit of a .NET ecosystem thing, maybe, because we are quite we're quite big there. Is that when teams use when the backend teams push GraphQL to the front-end teams, and it's not the front-end teams which see the problems of having an API and consuming this API, they sometimes do not see this data contract benefit. And when they don't do this, like I don't know how many front-end repos I reviewed where I said use fragments and everything will fall into place. Like if someone comes to us, they usually have issues. They never come to us when they don't have issues. It would be much easier to actually help them before they do the mistakes. But when they come to us, they have some sort of issues. And then you look at the backend code, you see it's actually fine. Then you look at the frontend code, you're like, well, they didn't get it. And it's 99% of the case, just use fragments and things will just fall into place. You automatically will have, like first time when you read about do not use lazy load query, you think this is impossible in Relay. And then you get to the point where you actually think, oh, it's actually quite reasonable. I don't need it anymore because I start composing fragments until I'm on the page through.
Yeah, so another thing that's kind of related also to lazy loading and whatever is how to, like the docs don't mention, I think maybe they do, but I don't remember reading about deferred. But this is also something I think we should maybe talk about is how to handle when integrating in a React. Like I'm all about React. So when you integrate in a React application, React really wants you to use suspense boundaries for spinners or whatever. But when you compose one big single root query, it kind of waits for, if you don't use deferred, it kind of waits for all the data. So it gets difficult to have different layers of suspense boundaries. How should we talk about this in fragments documentation or the golden path here, or should we even talk about it?
Yeah, it's a good question. That's where it helps to have a client that has a more or less use fragment hook that can detect that and suspend at the defer boundary. But yeah, in terms of golden path, I don't know.
I think on the golden path, we're probably not going to be recommending the adoption of things until they are RFC3, until they are essentially merged, and incremental delivery hasn't got there yet. It's close, but it's not
Yeah.
there yet. So we're gonna have to hold off on it for a little bit.
We have a couple of days still
Are you?
to merge it, I mean.
Yeah.
Sorry, Benji.
No worries. But yeah, I think that's going to be very much down to the client. So if your client is smart enough to use a suspense boundary, then fantastic. But if not, then ideally your GraphQL should be fast enough that it's not such a major concern. And if you're using really good fragment co-location, then obviously there are pages that will still suffer depending on what their data sources are. But by not fetching data that you're not rendering, you can significantly reduce the amount of time that it should take to resolve the query in the first place. Most of the queries that I resolve like are 20 milliseconds or under. So you don't even need incremental delivery for a lot of it unless it's like a really heavy dashboard page.
Yeah, but then it's like the solution is essentially if you use fragment co-location and you have these specific problems, defer the solution. And I mean, most clients implement it already.
I love the flex of, just I don't need defer. I only return below for 20 milliseconds. That's good.
That's how you end up with SQL.
What a statement. I love it. In Golden Path, I have a question. Like, I can't remember. Do we like have you specified something like, or do you advertise something like one query per page?
No, we haven't. Also, I don't think that one query per page is exactly right. I think it's actually two a lot of
Yes.
times. I think
Yes.
it's one for layout, one for
Yes.
like the long-lived Chrome of the page, and one for then the core functionality of that page itself.
100% agreed.
Yeah.
But I would say it probably trends towards two queries, right? Like if you don't have a layout and you don't have a user which is signed in, then it could most likely be one. It tends to be two. And I think this is very much a indication for we have to actually advertise for defer, because defer from the incremental delivery, like if you build with this philosophy, you need defer. Like it only works with defer. And if you need defer, you probably should also use fragments, I would say.
Coming back to it,
Yeah, I tend to agree.
I don't know. What's your experience with this, Toby? Do you have defer in Cedar.js?
No.
So,
but as I said, they're all separate queries. So, and they all get their own suspense boundary. So it works out that way. A lot of people end up having page cells, which is basically like the first component you render on a route is a cell. And you can't render anything before you get that data. So that's your layout group query, I guess. And then everything under that should probably be just one single query, but right now it's multiple.
Yeah, I'm just like, when I build UIs, I often run into the case where, how should I phrase this? Like, if you use Relay, you start using it in very fancy ways. So you start placing your fragments boundaries in the right place so that you, for example, without like complicated code, you can now you just have a search bar and a suspense boundary over the fragment, and now you can essentially, without doing much change or without doing any change, it just works now. And then you slap use transition on it, and then you're good to go, and it just works. And with defer, it's a bit the same thing. Like I believe I could, working with the client, knowing GraphQL, I believe I would always want to use fragments and defer in one way or the other, just because it gives so much. And it took me, I would say, 2 years to really understand how Relay works.
Yeah.
Like no, I mean intuitively. It's still a lot of stuff that I don't know, but just the basics, like just to intuitively understand how things go together and that it actually doesn't need to be complicated.
There's so we spent a lot of time talking about fragments when it comes to like rendering the page initially, even talking about like the layout versus the content of the page. But one of the other really, really critical pieces in this puzzle is the follow-up actions, and in particular, pagination. So if you've got like a table on the page that you're rendering and you're showing, say, the first 10 rows, when you fetch those second 10 rows, you should not be using that same page query and just giving it different arguments, because you may well have fetched other data that you don't need to refetch. So this is another case where fragments is really critical, because you say whatever is inside of this connection is in a fragment, and then I have a new query that fetches like page 2 plus of this table, and I use that same fragment within it, but with different pagination arguments, essentially.
Yes. And the other part that you mentioned, I think it's important as well, mutations. I don't know, Gerald, do you also have in Apollo client something like append node, append edge, and so on?
No, it's well, yes and no, not explicitly like that, but you basically do that with type policies in your in-memory cache, and a combination of that and either write fragment or write query, one of those.
Yeah,
but yeah,
so
you manage it on the cache config.
I mean, even if you do not, like, even if you have to do it inline with cache updates or whatever, it's quite nice if you have a list which renders, for example, users, and then you create a new user, and in the payload, you essentially just spread the fragment. And whenever now the user table changes, you will automatically also fetch the additional field for the response. And with this, you can, without the server round trip, essentially just update the list and append or prepend things. And that makes it easier because the side effect or you don't have to change, you don't have to think about it, right? It's just spread it in there.
So this actually opens one of the topics that like is one of my longer term aims with the Golden Path. Like one of the things with the Golden Path is to try and encompass as much of the best practices as we already have. But another one is also to set out like a really positive experience going forward. So introducing things like service capability, so you get the client auto configuration. And one of the things on this is actually the usage of cursor pagination on mutations and inserting new rows into the right place. So this is kind of unsolved at the moment, right? Because cursors are just opaque data. If we can come up with an approach, and this is really hard to do, to be clear, like this is unsolved. But if we can come up with an approach that allows us to essentially say, based on the stuff that you've already fetched, here is where this one should go. Like it should go before this other cursor, or the cursors are alphabetically sortable or something. And obviously,
I mean, they kind of are, right? Not from a client perspective, but
yes, they have to include all sort of ordering data within them, typically. So yeah, if you could make it so that they were truly sortable, such that the client just knows, oh, I can just insert it between these other two cursors that already exist, that would be amazing, right? Being able to create something or even pull it down. This is really critical. Pull it down from a live subscription, and you've just got this new node that's been created and you've fetched it with a particular cursor. So now you know it goes into this position in this table that you're rendering. This would be amazing. But I think it is quite a big challenge to solve. Nonetheless, I think it has value if we can do it.
What's the just out of curiosity, it's also a very interesting challenge to solve, of course. But apart from it being very interesting to solve, what's the UI usage for this one? Because if you cursor paginate, you say you want everything after it. And if you say, if you page forward, if you page the other direction, you say you want everything before this. So if something is added in a connection in between, then I don't think that there's any good way at the moment to do this.
Correct at the moment. But if we
It-
give like Golden Path first class
Yeah.
support, gone.
Oh, good. But like, what's the UI use case for this? Because let's say I have now created a user, or an entity. I've created a product. Now, if I have a left, even if the products are sorted alphabetically on the left side, the newly created product should probably be the first one in the list and highlighted that this one was newly created. Because otherwise you have bigger issues because you suddenly have to, like, let's say my product is apples and then from A down, right? Apple MacBook Air version 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And now I create, I don't know, a Samsung. Now, this edge would be added 17 pages below. So, like, I don't think that adding an edge in between a connection has much of a UI use case from a UX perspective. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do know what you mean. And I agree with you for many use cases, what you've described is correct. But imagine, for example, a sports event where you're rendering a table that's telling you, like, here are the 10 runners who are at the front. And those runners are always constantly like changing position. But also, if there's, say, 300 runners, like it's a marathon or something, and you're showing the top 10, people might be coming into or dropping out of that top 10. And you want to be rendering that. Now, obviously, in a case like that, you can just do it based on some kind of weighting or something that is use case specific. But there are other use cases like this, right? There are other things where you want to show like a live rendering of top items, or where you've got other people concurrently editing. I've just changed this thing from high priority to medium priority, and you now want that item in the table to disappear and be replaced by a new one, or the one from the next page, or whatever. This is one of the things where in Relay's original specs for cursor pagination, they had edges with nodes and cursors. Page info just basically had next page and has previous page, and that was it. But nowadays we tend to use the like nodes entry, and the page info we ask for the start cursor and the end cursor, because that's all that is typically used. But if we go back to the old model where we actually have a cursor on each entry, and we have a way of doing this, we can dynamically re-render these kind of tables if we wanted to. And it's not always appropriate, right? It's not always appropriate. And I agree that sometimes the new data should just be rendered at the top, or there should be just a like load refresh data or whatever. But sometimes you do want this kind of live thing, and you want it without live query style refetch all of the data each time. You just want the one new event that's happened.
Yeah.
Mostly it comes down to real time.
Yeah. I think I would just take, at the moment it's hard to tell. I might just take them on a case by case basis, because they're very different. But yeah, it's definitely a really interesting problem to solve.
Yeah, and then combine that with Michael's offset pagination cursors, and then it gets even more interesting.
Oh yeah, that's the offset pagination cursors where Michael disappeared for a week and came back with a solution. I was surprised. After I told him for a week that it's impossible. I think he took that personally.
I like them. I think they're really good. Okay, so we spent 45 minutes talking about fragments. Are there any final fragment questions or discussions? Is there a direction that we want to go forward in? And also, I raised a pull request to add the two words major data handling to the fragment colocation page. Are we happy with that fix?
I like it.
Cool. Okay, changing the topic. So one of the things in the Golden Path that's really missing at the moment is actual like concrete numbers. So for example, we've talked about like depth limits, but we've not said what the depth limit should be. There's, we've also said that you should have like a byte limit on the size of a GraphQL document, but like what is a reasonable byte limit? Like what's the largest reasonable GraphQL query that you folks receive? I scanned over a bunch earlier, and one of the largest ones that I had was 82 kilobytes, which seems pretty big. My guess was 100 kilobytes as like a reasonable cutoff. So the fact that 82 got there, I'm thinking like maybe 250 might be more reasonable. But essentially, like as a default for engines, look at the byte length of the document, and if it's more than 250 kilobytes, chuck it out essentially, without even bothering to validate it, as a default. And then obviously people can change it. But I would love to know what reasonable values for this are, what are reasonable values for depth, what are reasonable values for list depth, and all these other things. Joel, you might even be able to help more with this because of your connections in, well, both you and Pascal, Michael, actually, because you handle a lot of queries being stored into your databases. Perhaps you can run some kind of like analytics across them, pull out some statistics.
Yeah, I'll ask around.
That'd be really, really helpful. And like anything that you can think that might be useful as well. Like, I mean, what's a reasonable ceiling for the number of variables that you might accept? And any other such, anything that seems useful. Number of fields queried. What's the like 99.5th percentile of number of fields requested within a single selection set?
What also is interesting, the number of different skip include conditions that you have.
And I'd love that also grouped by whether they're accepting different variables or not as well.
Exactly, because like it can be very query planning can become very complicated if you have a lot of skip and include conditions.
Yes, and that's also going to apply to incremental delivery as well with the if clause.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we by default have, I think in Hot Chocolate we have a limit of 64. You can up it, but
yeah, I would say probably the Facebook, Netflix, etc. are the right ones to ask this question. Because they can for sure analyze their queries.
This is another interesting question as well, because I'd like this scoped in two ways. One, where you're receiving queries directly from clients, from applications, and one where it's actually subgraphs. Because, for example, like Apollo's Federation has the ability to do like field-based batching, right? Where you just repeat the fields. Is that right?
Yeah. You basically have the entities field, and you can pass one variable in for all the things that you need from one entity. Then you can combine it essentially with alias batching.
Right. So there's also like patterns out there in the wild where people literally like request fields just multiple times with a different ID each time. So I've seen it in use, for example, in change sets where they get the commit data from GitHub and they want to pull down like 500 commits, but GitHub doesn't have a batch endpoint for doing that. So they just repeat the selection set 500 times, each with a different ID. So there are patterns like that out there, which hopefully we can solve by just having variable batching. But yeah, I would love to know like this kind of patterns out there. What does it look like? What are reasonable uses?
Are these things that GraphQL Shield can filter on, and would they have data on this?
I don't know whether they do telemetry. I imagine that they are things that it can filter on, but I don't know whether they ever like send those results anywhere or whether it just runs locally. I would imagine that it all runs locally and it doesn't send anything anywhere. Otherwise, I'd be a bit concerned.
Yeah, I was hoping maybe they had run. I mean, ask their customers or users, or like have any kind of data that they use to for recommendations on what limits people should set with their tool.
It's I would say it's also very infrastructure dependent. Like it's very difficult to give you, like, for instance, field complexity, right? We in Hot Chocolate, we have a default field complexity, which is always wrong. Because like what even complexity means on your system in your setup on your hardware is very different from and there could be like a whole range of what is acceptable. Like in Meta, every query above 100 milliseconds, or what did they say is considered slow? And in some smaller business applications, a second or two are acceptable. So depending on where you sit on this scale, like if you are a Meta or if you're a small eShop or so, the things can vary a lot.
I really, really like this. So like a small shop which takes more than a second. You know, I
No,
know,
but
I
you
know,
know
I know,
these
I
healthcare.
know a certain German company with 3 letters which is famous for the slow UI and
Yeah,
the slow
SAP.
request.
Sorry. Yeah. But what I meant is like depending on your business, certain things can be acceptable that are not acceptable to others.
Yeah,
So there might be.
Fully agree. And I think that all of these values should be configurable. But what we want to do with the golden path is say how they're configurable, say how to read what those configuration values are so that ESLint or whatever can read it, but also make it so that we give you a reasonable starting point. And I think in general, it's better to start with lower limits, like what's the 95th percentile, because that will guide people into doing things the right way. I don't really care too much about the outliers that are doing like 50 level deep querying. I care, does 12 cover most people, or does it need to be 14? That kind of thing. So yeah.
I would argue that the only way to figure it out is to set it very low and then let people complain. Because like if you now ask the community to tell us what good values are, no one will.
Yeah, what I also think on this, like, what's the intention for us frameworks to have defaults? Then I would say make them lower, and then people can up them. It's better than going for a larger limit, and that yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I definitely think we should set lower, but also you shouldn't set the default depth limit to 1 and just basically say everyone has to update it. So like, what should it be? I think probably like the like 75th percentile or something like that might be reasonable. Maybe even the 90th percentile. I'd love to see what the sort of swing is there.
We could
because we want people to have a good first experience too.
I mean, maybe Apollo can query the Apollo Studio what's the average depth are. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm going to ask about that after this meeting, just to see if there's anything we can.
Yeah, interesting would be to have buckets like, okay, there's like most of the queries are in this bucket. That would be cool.
Yeah, I would love that. Also, if the depth of your queries isn't like above 3, maybe you're not doing the fragments and stuff, and you're just doing RESTQL, as you say. So maybe we should have a minimum query depth. No, I'm joking. Awesome. All right. Well, I look forward to receiving any data that you will have. Please submit it through issues if you are able to.
Quickly, question regarding this,
Go
just
on.
very quick. Have you ever considered not setting a depth limit if there is no recursive types?
Well, there are recursive types in introspection, but you mean if you disable introspection as well?
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
It's very rare that a GraphQL schema is a true directed acyclic graph. It's very, very rare. Normally, if there's a relationship in one direction, there'll be a relationship in the reverse direction. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand. All good. You're right. It's unlikely that you will never have a loop. Somewhere there's always going to be a loop.
Yeah.
Even if you disable introspection, I agree.
And it only takes one.
It only takes one. That's correct.
Awesome. Thank you very much, everyone. And I'll catch you next month.
Thanks a bunch.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.